next reflection is on the curriculum itself. So you can see there, the COVID-19 pandemic forced our education system to cover only the most essential from the original curriculum that we have. So these changes were drastically implemented as a response to the pandemic in a top-down approach, meaning the Department of Education or our Department of Education developed and identified the most essential in social studies education, and they delegated it, transferred it, cascaded it to the teachers. And we as teachers are expected to follow on this through the creation and development of our self-learning modules and other printed materials to be given to students. I have to tell you that when we conducted our classes during the pandemic time, students have two options. It's either they will do full remote, which is through learning modules or printed modules that we deliver to them in their houses. And the second one is through attending online synchronous classes. So imagine the teachers doing two jobs, no, by checking the modules, delivering the modules, and at the same time conducting online synchronous meeting for the students. That's how flexible the education delivery in the Philippines was during the pandemic, and even now it's still continuing up until to this moment. So with this kind of approach, the first thing that came into my mind was, how do we define essential in social studies education? I believe that there are this really forced us to rethink how social studies will be delivered and implemented in the basic education level. And yet, if we are forced to say that you teach only the most essential, how do we define the most essential in social studies education? As you can see in this image on the right side, this is how the Department of Education identified what most essential learning is. So learning competency is essential if, first, it is aligned with the national and or local standard frameworks. It connects to the content to higher concepts across content areas. It is applicable to real life situations. And if students leave the school, it would still be important for them to have this kind of competency or learning above many others. And lastly, it would not be expected for most students to learn this in settings other than through formal education. This is how they define what is most essential for social studies in the pandemic era. But right now, after after a year of implementing this, can we adjust or revisit how we define what most essential learning is, especially in social studies? Third and last reflection is on the teaching and learning of social studies during the pandemic. So in this reflection, my essential question would be, how do we teach social studies without actual interaction with society? We have been, our country have been in a very, very long lockdown. I think we are in, if we will write history of pandemics, no, in the COVID-19 pandemic, Philippines has the longest lockdown in the world. No, up until now, we are still in a lockdown, and schools have not yet opened. We're still doing the distance learning in our country. So this is a question for us social studies teachers on how we actually teach social studies when we cannot interact with the society. We're just confined in our homes. How do we connect to that? Secondly, the contextualization of lived experiences in the topics explored and discussed in the Philippine social studies in relation with the pandemic. Since social studies in the Philippines is very integrative, okay, the different social science disciplines are integrated in the teaching of social studies. So how do we connect or contextualize the personal lived experiences of the students, such as the lockdown experiences, COVID-19 infections, or even the different quarantine status that the government is imposing to us? How do we connect that to the global experience of the pandemic? So maybe this is an answer to my essential question on how do we teach social studies without interaction with the society? the personal lived experiences, and the global experience. Third reflection is on how media, information, and digital literacy is very important in social studies teaching and learning. This is both for the teacher and the students. Our country is going into a crisis right now, as Jennifer Kavanagh and Michael Rich has stated this in their study, Truth Decay, that we are experiencing truth decay in the contemporary society wherein people are beginning to not believe their the sources of factual information. And these are experienced through the fake news that are being propagated in social media and other media outlets. So with the so now that we cannot connect to the society, and the only soul connection, or the not only soul connection, but the widely used connection to the outside world is social media, is now peddled with fake information or even fake news. How do we teach our teachers and our students to do critical thinking and assessment to the information that they are seeing in media and in social media? I believe that most of us here are teachers, and we use social media and even in the internet per se in teaching social studies right now. Because I mean, this is the society right now. We are in the internet society, internet age. So how do we teach our teachers to do media information and digital literacy, and how do we pass it to our students also? And lastly, with the pandemic as our context right now, there is an issue of empowerment. You know, when the pandemic came, we felt helpless. I mean, we have to accept that fact that most of us felt helpless. We cannot do anything about it. The virus is there. It infects people. People are dying. Families are being torn apart because you need to isolate when you are infected. Now, in social studies education, if our goal is citizenship transmission, and empowerment is a very important concept in citizenship, how do we empower our students in these trying times, in the time of pandemic, when they feel helpless, when they feel mentally and emotionally drained because they are isolated from their friends or even their peers? It is an issue of self-empowerment. So as teachers teaching social studies, how do we empower our students to fight, no, to stand up against the social issues despite what they are experiencing during the pandemic times? Okay? So with these reflections, what can we learn, no, from these experiences in the pandemic? I'd like to emphasize that restoring conditions to where they were before the pandemic is not possible. We cannot go back to the old normal as they have already described in previous years. No, we will only have a new normal, not the old normal. So first things, I think what we can learn from this experience is to document the events as they happen for future reference, for reference in future planning. You know, social studies teachers are repositories of knowledge and understanding of society. We are the first layer of the repository of this knowledge of society. So I believe that part of the teacher competency that we need in social studies is how we can teach our teachers to be repositories of knowledge. And also, we need to build on this experience and continue to develop a very resilient curriculum. The pandemic has challenged the way we deliver our education to our students. And now that we have experienced it and we continue to experience it, I think it's high time that we see the future and we prepare for the future as a resilient education. Education that is resilient, curriculum that is resilient to any pandemic or epidemics or any adverse or unwanted or unprecedented occasions. Secondly, what can we learn from this is that social studies education is very dynamic. The pandemic has proved to us that the social studies or this learning area is very integral to the education of every student. Why? Because it is now that we need to understand more the society. Even though we are not personally or physically experiencing the outside world, even we are isolated in our homes, this is the time that we are actually connected, more connected to what is happening around the world. And lastly, what can we learn from this is revisiting the nature, goal, and philosophy of, at least in our context, the Philippine social studies, and taking into consideration the pandemic experience. Some have already called for how is social studies relevant today? Are we just teaching social studies for the sake of teaching it? Or are we really teaching social studies to prepare our students to become resilient and to face the challenges of any unprecedented event in our society? So lastly, I'd like to share with you this framework on proposed by the EduCause IT issues in 2021, that as we emerge from this pandemic era, we need to restore, evolve, and transform. What do we need to restore? Restoration will be focused on figuring out what to do to get back to where we were before the pandemic. What do we need to restore in social studies education? We need to restore self-empowerment. Okay? Second, evolve. How do we evolve? Evolution will be focused on adapting to the new normal, since we cannot go back to our old ways. So, since students are now exposed to different media in learning social studies and different techniques and strategies in learning social studies, how do we evolve from that? How do we adapt from that? And lastly, to transform. Transformation is focused on redefining our institution and taking an active role in creating the innovative future of education. This is the redefinition of social studies, at least in the Philippines and also in other countries. How do we transform the learning area such that we have experienced the pandemic?
What do you think about the problem of learning loss?
I think someone's okay. Thank you very much. So with that sharing of some reflections, I'd like to thank you all for listening to this very short and very brief presentation on some of my reflections as a social studies teacher in teaching social studies during the pandemic era. Thank you very much, and I hope you all stay safe and healthy always.
Oke, maraming selamat. Selamat po. Thank you very much, Dr. Nicole Marie E. Saravikorias, for your nice and valuable presentation. I also will not making the conclusion and restate the main point of the presentation from the speaker. However, you are voicing the Indonesian teacher also aspiration. How about the reflection of social studies in Indonesia, also similar with the Philippine, I think. Thank you very much, Doctor.
You're welcome also, Pa Andy.
Okay. I'm sure some of you, ladies and gentlemen, are curious to ask questions. So please write them down in the chat box. Well, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, the last but not least, our keynote speaker is Professor Dr. Sapria. All of us, as students and lecturers at the Faculty of Social Studies Education, UPI, Indonesia University of Education, I think already know and are very familiar with Professor Dr. Sapria. He is senior lecturer at the Department of Civic Education, Faculty of Social Studies Education, UPI. His expertise on civic education and social studies education. He earned his undergraduate study in civic education of IKIP, Institute of Education and Teacher Training, now UPI, in Bandung in 1987, master degree in social studies education from La Trobe University in Australia in 1998, and doctoral study in social studies education from UPI in 2007. Today, Professor Dr. Sapria will sharing and caring with us related to global citizenship education in social studies in the pandemic era. Well, Professor Dr. Sapria, time is yours, 20 to 30 minutes for presentation, please.
Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat siang, salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. Good afternoon, the Honorable Director of School of Postgraduate Studies, Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia, Profesor Dr. Syahabudin, Head of Study Program of Social Studies Education, Profesor Dr. Nana Supriyatna, Master of Education, distinguished guests, invited speakers, Professor Chan Shengju, PhD from Faculty of Education, National Chung Cheng University, Taiwan. And then Professor Dr. Wasino, Master of Humanities from Department of History Education, Semarang State University. Professor Dr. Hiromi Kawaguchi from Hiroshima University. Your presentation is very, very interesting. And also Professor Dr. Nicoli, Serapi Koreas. Congratulations.
You student, right? You student, right?
Your presentation is so amazing. She is alumni from Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia, and now she is professor in Philippine Normal University, the Philippines. And our moderator, Mr. Adis Wirta, Master of Humanities. It's 14 hours. Steering and Organizing Committee and all participants of the 6th International Seminar on Social Studies and History Education. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, let us give thanks to God, the Almighty, Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, which has brought us together to virtual hours today. All right. I would like to present the topic as offered by the committee, that is global citizenship education and social studies in the pandemic era. Actually, this topic has also presented by Professor Hiromi, and I want to set back to the nature, okay, of the global citizenship education, and also what the dealing with the social studies. All right, in this event, I just want to share information about global citizenship education as United Nations of Education, Economic, Social, and Cultural Organization, or UNESCO agenda or program since 2012. So I would like to share some online document published by UNESCO deal with global civic education. I'm also so impressing what the UNESCO published due to we are as educational community, especially in social studies, we are aware that social studies have a mission to achieve the goal of global citizenship education. The main point of my presentation is how to adopt some findings about global civic education, especially in Europe, Middle East and North Africa, and also Asia Pacific as learning resources or experiences for our social studies classroom. We are aware that, as Elizabeth Harman say, we do not and cannot be locally. We are connected to other around the world in myriad ways. All right. Please, I want to share this screen on my PowerPoint. I have three questions for our discussion. The first one is what is global citizenship education, and actually have been presented also by Professor Hiromi. And then I want to set back to ask the question: is it really that global citizenship education in social studies, and why? And how is global citizenship education implemented to social studies in the pandemic era? All right. For the first question, we have a definition from the UNESCO that global citizenship refers to a sense of belonging to broader community and common humanity. It emphasizes political, economic, social, and cultural interdependency in interconnectedness between the local, the national, and the global. And global citizenship education is a framing paradigm which encapsulates how education can develop the knowledge, skill, values, and attitudes. Then let's need to securing a world which is more just, peaceful, tolerant, inclusive, secure, and sustainable. I think this definition is very important for us because especially in the context of civic education, we know that civic education generally is national citizenship or national context. But we now have other term that's global citizenship education. So we can learn from this definition that there are some values or general value like peaceful, tolerant, inclusive, secure, sustainable. That is, I think this is the key point for us that we are as what we call human, and our in the only one planet is the word, that's the only one, have to save, okay, the our planet, I think. So we have to develop some general universal values, I mean, like peaceful, tolerant, inclusive, secure, and sustainable, as recommended by the UNESCO. And these values is in global citizenship education. I quote from the United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon in 2012 that we must foster global citizenship. Education is about more than literacy and numeracy. It is also about citizenry. Education must fully assume its essential role in helping people to forge more just, peaceful, and tolerant society. I think this is very important for us to study global citizenship education. All right, there are the dimensions of global citizenship. We are in educational context or study. Of course, it's very familiar because we have cognitive, there are socio-emotional, and behavioral. So this other term from cognitive, affective, and skill, I think, of psychomotor. In global citizenship education, we have to acquire knowledge, understanding, and critical thinking about global, regional, national, and local issues. And also the interconnectedness and interdependency of different country and population. In social emotional domain, we have also to have a sense of belonging to a common humanity. And I think this is very important for our students. sharing values and responsibilities, empathy, solidarity, respect differences, and diversity. And the last, for behavioral domain, we have to act effectively and responsibly at local, national, and global levels for more peaceful and sustainable work. Uh, the key point of the goal of global civic education is transformative, building the knowledge, skill, and values, and be able to contribute more inclusive, just as peaceful world. If we what we call global civic education in practice, we can mapping like this. All right, learners or our children of global civic education, of course, have to aim a more inclusive, just, and peaceful world. So, through global citizenship education, our children asking to building the knowledge, skill, values, and attitude. And who is the learners? The learners, according to UNESCO recommendation, is from early childhood until adulthood. So this is included primary children, secondary and secondary school children, and also senior secondary school children, and also for high school students. And we have also using formal and informal approaches, curricular and extracurricular intervention, and also conventional and unconventional way. So we can use many ways, many approaches. All right. In brief, I want to discuss about global education, global citizenship education in social studies. This is, for me, this is quite important because in Indonesia, we have two subject matter in school, for example. There is this like civic education, we call PPKN, Pendidikan Pancasila and Kewarganegaraan, and IPS or social studies. But in other country, I think they just have just social studies or just civic education. So many people ask about this. Why Indonesia should have two subject matter? It is not just one subject, for example. All right. Actually, citizenship education is the purpose of social studies, as stated by some experts like Barbat, Shermis, and then Engel, and Okwa, and there's Woloffer and Scott, and also NCSS as National Council for the Social Studies. When formulate the definition of social studies, that the end of the social studies effort is to promote civic competence. All right. Barbat and Shermis also stated in the book of Defining of Social Studies that there are three traditions in social studies. The first one is social studies as citizens transmission. The second one is social sciences. And the third one is reflective inquiry. Okay, and then this is supported also by other experts like Woloffer and Scott. But Woloffer and Scott added 2 points. Besides citizenship transmission, reflective and social sciences, uh, they added 2 points, that is personal development and rational decision making and social action. And then the third one is from Martorella, Bill, and Bollick. Uh, Number one is citizenship transmission. The second one, social sciences. The third one, reflective inquiry. Number four and number five, informed social criticism and personal development. So many social studies experts argue and then recognize that citizenship transmission or citizenship education is part of social studies. Ladies and gentlemen, I have number three question. How is global citizenship education implemented through social studies in pandemic era? And I present this mostly from what UNESCO study or UNESCO recommend. But before we discuss about what the study of UNESCO, we just to uh, say what the Mark Gergen say. He asked, are we really global? Okay. That this is to support, to back up of what we call global citizenship education. That ourselves as truly global. What make truly global? The first one is our genes. The second one is our body. The third one is our societies. The next is economics, environment, possession, civic life, and religious. That this is as global according to McGregor. All right. There is some findings or results from UNESCO study that the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, especially on children's voice. And the research is undertaken in Europe and also Middle East and North Africa. Number one, that in 2020, nearly 1 billion children are affected by school closure and due to the lack of preparedness of education system. School and teachers were forced to adapt to new teaching and learning method almost overnight. At the same time, parents also found themselves unprepared to deliver online learning, often lacking the skill, equipment, and time for homeschooling. Number three, this experience expected to significantly affect this generation earning and life opportunity. And number four, the children from social economic disadvantage background are said to be the worst affected by school closure and the most likely to suffer the worst long-term impact on educational outcomes. All right, this is some document from UNESCO is published and result of research. Number one is about understanding global civic education in Asia Pacific, and then there is global citizenship and integration history and secondary curricula in Southern Africa, and then global citizenship education. This is preparing learners for the challenge of the 21st century, and then preparing teachers for global citizenship, and also learning and assessment and educational content up close. I think this document is very important for us, especially for teachers and for our children in the classroom, especially in social studies. Uh, to know what the global issue and also in the effect of the pandemic. Okay, there are three results from the UNESCO, what we call from the research. Yeah. Number one is widespread loss of learning and children voice. So this is the impact of the pandemic, and we can learn from this that percentage drop in the number of children voice opportunities offered during school closure in comparison with pre-pandemic levels in Europe and Middle East and North Africa countries. Okay. Sorry. The second result, there is a greater distinction. It's about socioeconomic barriers to participation. There is a greater distinction between private school and state school in relation to the ability to continue community project. Compared to state schools, private schools were much more likely to find ways to continue children's activities. And then the result number three, which is about digital citizenship. Okay, in the figure, we can see that the pandemic led to unprecedented uptake in the use of technology for remote teaching, with almost 94% of teachers reporting that they deliver lesson through video conferencing, and almost 87% also using social media to stay connected with children and parents. While many teachers has already started to incorporate technology into their classroom teaching as a means of promoting children's children voice to live class polls and quizzes, for example. These practices have increased with the shift to remote teaching, with 54% of teachers doing so in most or all lessons, namely 19% point increase from pre-pandemic level. And then the last result, that is result number 4, is resilience factor in children voice. Children voice projects that are more likely to continue during the crisis have already access to reliable technology that allows them to move elements of project online. While video conference software is widely available access to high-speed digital infrastructure, varies between countries, within countries, and even between children in the same class. Ladies and gentlemen, after the school closed on 20 March, The administration built a consensus-based methodology for all online education environment. Google Classroom platform were adopted as part of the learning by doing approach, and television was used for those without internet at home. All right, the last one is some recommendation. There are 3 recommendations. The first one for school directors and professional teachers and educators. Number 2 is recommendation for policymakers. And number 3, recommendation for children and young people. All right, there are 10 recommendations, and I think this recommendation is quite important for us, especially for social studies teachers. Like recommendation for school directors and professional teachers and educators. Build a strong and lively participate culture within and outside the school. I think this is we call as the new normal in the learning practice. Number 2, develop a monitoring framework to measure progress of children's voice and participation. How many aspects in development we should monitor our children, even in the limited access. So even though we are in the pandemic era, all the teachers or educators have to on in educational practice. Number 3, promote the development of the democratic culture competencies. Due to we have limited action and interaction, we should to make new condition new normal. All right, I think number 2 is recommendation for policymakers, like actively promote the right of children and youth to express their views and participate as non-negotiable. Number 2, prioritize student voice by ensuring that sufficient time and resources are invested into etc. And then the third one, recommendation for children and young people. And the children is recommend to work together to explain to adults, policymakers, teachers, and school leaders, community representatives, and parents why youth voice matters. Get actively involved in children assembly, etc. So I think these 3 kinds of recommendation is very important for us, especially for educator and for teacher as lesson learned. So I think there are 3 lessons then from what the UNESCO have studied in the pandemic era. The first one, we can use the findings and recommendation of a UNESCO study to overcome the impact of pandemics. The second one, school directors and personal teachers, educators in all countries can take lessons from the findings and recommendation, especially for social studies learning purposes. And the third one, children can adjust learning according to the condition of the pandemic era by utilizing the existing technology, even some limitation condition. All right, I think that's all. Thank you, moderator. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you once again. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hatur nuhun pisan. Thank you very much, Prof. Sapria, for nice and valuable information in 80 minutes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, we have listened to the 3 keynote speakers in presenting their respective topic. Now we will have a Q&A session. As usual, I will select and read out the question in the chat box and distributing it to each keynote speaker. If there is still time and if possible, we will reopen this Q&A session. There's a lot of question in the chat box. I think I would like to select and then distribute to each keynote speaker. one I would like to read from Haris Norfaiji from UPI. I think it is the question for Professor Dr. Hiromi Kawaguchi. The question is about creating critical thinking with communication in discussion on controversial issues. Is it could be implemented on the other context also? And is there any method of teaching cultural diversity which has been implemented already as well as in school curriculum in Japan, where has homogeneous society?
Okay.
So,
Can I
okay.
can I answer now?
Okay,
Okay.
Professor.
Oh, thank you, Haris. This is a very important question. I think that when we introduce the controversial issues, I think we do not suddenly introduce the controversial issues, especially the issues is related to a student's identity or real life, because it could be a kind of attack from others. Yeah, because other voices sometimes could become a kind of attack from the others. So I think it's important thing is, firstly, we would like to establish safe spaces and open discussion. So I think the personal relationship and the secure environment should be established before introducing the controversial issues. And the second question is, I think it's quite hard for me to answer. I think yes, cultural diversity is one of the important topic in social studies curriculum. However, it's a kind of the cultural diversity is just one topic to teach. So I don't think that it's useful for the children to reflect their own experience and to deepen understanding the culture. Because, for instance, in social studies textbook, according to the social studies textbook, the Japan became a multicultural society. So we should respect the others' discourses and human rights or something like that. It's very normative, and it's not, yeah, but I think to introduce a cultural diversity, at first we should reflect the foundation of our society at first, and why those immigrants suffered from our society. So a kind of reflection cannot be implemented. Of course, a personal teachers personally try to do, but it's not so common in nations. So I think we should implement a more effective way as a whole country. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Dr. Hiromi Kawaguchi. The next question, I think it is for Dr. Nicole Mari, Serapi Koreas. Fortunately, the question in the Bahasa Indonesia, I think you understand. Because you are Indonesian citizen, right? Just kidding, you are Filipino. Oke, selamat. Nama saya Yeni Priska. Saya ingin bertanya pada Nicole Mary, apakah di Filipina ada wilayah yang tidak memiliki jaringan internet? And jika ada, bagaimana mengatasi permasalahan belajar online di era pandemi? I think it is about the internet connection, maybe in remote area, in the border area between the South Philippines and North Indonesia, maybe, and the village and so on and so forth. Doctor, please answer.
Okay, thank you for that question, Yeni. First of all, since Philippines is an archipelagic country, not all of the areas in our country have internet connectivity. So how did our education system responded to this challenge? First things first, allow me to share my screen. I'll show you a photo. This is how our department or our educational system had responded to the issue of internet connectivity in the era of pandemic. So it is in their conception that not all of the students can do online learning. So what we did as teachers, also I was part of this kind of system, was to develop printed modules. So we have modules right here. We have modules that we developed, we wrote, and these were validated by experts before they were printed and they were distributed to each student. So in the first photo, you can see here, this is a teacher who is distributing the learning kit, wherein this pink box contains all of the printed modules that the student will need to accomplish for the duration of the school year. So the teacher is delivering the learning kit of the student, and she will also return it at a very specific time period to check if the student have accomplished and to check also the learning of the student through the modules. And the other method was for the more urban areas or urbanized areas in the Philippines. The parents or the guardians go to the school of their child and they pick up the learning modules of the students. So in this kind of system, not all students are required to do online learning, but they are required to do offline or modular learning. That's how we responded to the issue of internet connectivity in the pandemic era in our country. Until now, we are doing it.
Selamat po, Dokter. Thank you very much. And next question, I think it is from Professor Sapria related to the global citizenship from Nur Azizah from Social Studies Education. I want to ask, how are the efforts in building quality and integrity education, I think related to global citizenship education, maybe, Prof. Please, Professor Sapria.
Okay. Thank you for the question. I think it's an important question. How are the efforts in building quality and integrity education? Right. I think integrity education is something we have to be effort, okay? And then in the pandemic era, especially, we have limitation to access in school, especially, or in offline learning. So family, I think, is one of institution can be utilized by us, okay, to make children can learn effectively. Okay, so integrated education, I think we can integrate the process of learning or education between school as a teacher and also the family, parents, and also society, I think, and especially to support the technology. We can utilize like company who have money or finance to support the process of learning in between school and family. I think like that. So we can integrate what the facility, what the resources to utilize to achieve the purpose of education. I think that's all. Okay.
Thank you very much, Prof. Dr. Sapria. I think we have still time 15 minutes. And I think it is important to note here to sharing and caring with Professor Hiromi Kamaguchi. I think I think about the controversial issues in social studies in Japan and Korea, I think comparing with the Southeast Asian countries, it is also similar. There are many controversial issues in history, in social studies education. But the critical question, this is many students in elementary and secondary school asked to me, for example, for the East Asia region, why in East Asia there are no regional organization like ASEAN in Southeast Asian countries? It is just just critical question. Why in East Asia there are no regional organization like ASEAN in Southeast Asia? Maybe Professor Dr. Hiromi Kawaguchi can keep sharing and caring with us related about this question, and maybe how the, for example, good relationship between the leaders in East Asia explained it in the social studies textbook or in history textbook in Japan and in other East Asia. Professor, please.
Sorry, could you say me again the question, the central question?
There's no regional organization in East Asia, right? Like in Southeast Asia, there's the ASEAN, Southeast Asian Nation Organization, consists of 10 nation states. But in East Asia, particularly Japan, South Korea, North Korea, and China, why there's no organization, regional organization in East Asia? Maybe you could sharing and carrying with me.
You mean that in Japan, we studied about East Asian as a content, or?
Yes.
Okay, to cultivate the citizenship of East Asian citizenship or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't, yeah, it's quite hard to answer. Actually, it's almost, it's almost impossible for the current situation because we have a lot of dispute beyond the society country, and so I sometimes very good example of Southeastern Asia because you have an ASEAN community and you have bond, so very strong bond toward the countries, but in the context of East Asia, it's quite hard. And in Japanese textbook, we of course, there are a lot of description about Korea and China because we are very close. However, I don't think that we created the same or similar identity as Eastern Asian citizenship. But hopefully for the future, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Professor Dr. Hiromi. And I think maybe it is the simple question for the Dr. Nicole. Just want to know what kind of language in teaching and learning for social studies in elementary and maybe secondary school in the Philippines, the Tagalog language or the English?
We use the Filipino language in teaching social studies. So yes, we teach world history in Philippine language.
Okay. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I think we still have time, maybe 15 minutes. Nana, maybe any question or any what is comment for the Professor Hiromi, Professor Satria, and Dr. Nicole Mary?
There is one question, I think, Pak Andi.
Good.
Sandria Mustajab.
Oh, in chat bot, right? Okay, please, Professor. Yeah.
The question is there another way for construct and build integrity for the student? All right, I think for me, education is the main effort to be a human, and education is process of knowing, perfecting, and doing okay, to be a humanity, and this is must be planned because the principle of education is planning. So if other way is must be is not planned to be a human, I think, to be the man or the human. And then yeah, if we call modeling, like modeling or like intervention, I think that's also part of the education. So for me, that the to be quality, to be man, quality of, to increase man quality of man. This is the way is education for me. Okay, because I'm a from educator perspective.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Dr. Sapria. I think related to the Professor Hiromi Kawaguchi topic, I think it is very interesting about the critical issues. I think it is maybe a question for the Dr. Nicola Mari, as we know that in our history, in 1963 to 1966, there's the what we call in Indonesian terminology confrontation against the Malaysia. But I think this critical event is not only involve the Indonesia and Malaysia government, but also the Philippines, right? The President Diosdado Macapagal. My question is how the critical issues, political issues in dispute of our political, what is border maybe, in social studies, education, teaching and learning in material in secondary school in the Philippines, Dr. Nicolai.
Thank you for that question, Pa Andy. First things first, I'd like to tell you that this issue is not being discussed in the secondary school, but this is discussed in the elementary level. Because we are discussing Philippine history in 5th and 6th grade in our basic education system. So how do we go about controversial issues such as territory, and of course the issue with Malaysia? We have our Philippine history have already came into what do you call this, came into agreement that Sabah, Malaysia, is not really part of the Philippines. So that's how we teach the students. It is a fact in our Philippine constitution and in our territory, which is indicated in our 1987 Philippine Constitution, that Sabah, Malaysia is not part of the Philippines. But for other controversial issues, such as, which is very contemporary right now, the issue of the West Philippine Sea, the Philippines and the China and the West Philippine Sea, we tackle it head on. Like, we really tell our students that the West Philippine Sea, the Kalayaan group of islands in the Philippines, is part of the Philippines, and we do not agree with the 9-dash line provided by China. That's how we really tackle this controversial issue. We tackle it head on. We tell our students, we teach our students that the Philippines won in the international court, in Hague in 2012, and China has no claim in the West Philippines.
Okay, thank you very much, Doctor. I think it is very interesting information, and thanks God that ASEAN, Association of Southeast Asian Nation, what is become stable, what is regional organization. I think because this is the role of President Suharto of Indonesia, Prime Minister Najib Razak from Malaysia, and President Ferdinand Marcos from the Philippines, so that the good relationship between Indonesia, Malaysia, and Filipina is okay. And
yeah, the Mafilindo group.
Mafilindo,
yeah, which is the
before ASEAN, right?
the before ASEAN.
Okay, I think Bu Diani, we 12 minutes again. Any question? Maybe directly raise hand. And please, your question to Prof. Sapria or Prof. Hiromi or Dr. Nicolai. Any question or any comment? Directly raise hand, please. Prof. Nana? Prof. Nana, I think it is.
Yes, thank you very much, Pak Andi. In our life now, in the era of pandemic, there are some controversial issues. For example, about vaccine. We to cure our virus, COVID-19. We need a vaccine. We need vaccination. In one side, yes. In the other side, if we take vaccine, whatever the vaccine, we can enrich global corporation, mostly coming from, yes, developed countries, for example. Yeah. So we have hard to choose which one. We need vaccine, but in reality, vaccine is a business now. So this is very controversial. My question to Hiromi, how to give some information to discuss this topic to our student in the controversial issue. Yes, please. Thank you.
Answer now. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you for your wonderful and essential question toward the controversial issues. I think the information is essential to good discussion toward a controversial issue. However, sometimes the teachers give the information first and the discussion next. I think the students might forget everything to discuss when they discuss it. So I think that the stage of giving the information must be a part of discussion stage. So at first, I think the teachers should give the discussion topic, and next, I think the students must get enough information to a deep discussion. So I think sometimes it's easier for the teachers to give the information at first, but I don't think that it's not connected to the good discussion after that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Nicole, please. The same question is for
Okay.
you.
Yes. To answer Professor Dr. Nana's question on vaccines, first of all, the issue, before we say that this is a critical issue, the same question with how do we say that this is a critical issue for this society and this is not a critical issue for another society? For example, the issue of taking vaccines is an issue for vegans. The movement of veganism, right?
Yeah.
There's a society of vegans. They do not take any product that contains animal byproducts. But if we talk about the issue of taking vaccines in a society wherein in the medical setup or in the medical community, it's a different issue for them. It's a critical issue for them to take the vaccine because this is a medical community. To the vegans, it's a different approach again. So when we say that this is a critical issue, I believe that the teacher should be very clear on whom this critical issue is being discussed to. That's my view and take on the issue of vaccines and the businesses behind the production of vaccines. But on a personal note, I think it's a moral obligation for everybody as teachers that we need to take the vaccines.
Yes, we agree with you.
As possible and practicable, we need to take the vaccines. Thank you very much.
Okay. Professor Sapria, please. Thank you.
The question has been answered by Professor Hiromi and Professor Nicole, so it is enough.
Thank you, Professor Priya.
Okay,
Yeah, please, Pandi.
okay, thank you very much, Professor Dr. Nana Supriyata. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, because there is not enough time, I think, we will end our question and answer session. The questions that have been written in the chat box and have not been answered hopefully became material for reflection and critical question, which require serious and comprehensive research to answer it. I also, as moderator once again, will not make general conclusion and summarize that has been stated by keynote speakers. However, I would like to thank you very much to Professor Dr. Hiromi Kawaguchi, Professor Dr. Nicole Mari, and also Professor Dr. Sapria. Hopefully we can meet again in next international conference. And the explanation from the keynote speakers are also expected to enrich our knowledge about social studies education and history education on one hand, and on the other hand, it can be used as interesting themes to continue to be studied and researched in the future. Well, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, I think let's ending our virtual meeting now by reciting together Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin. Thanks God, and hopefully God bless us. And I will back this agenda to Ibu Diani as our master of ceremony. Ibu Diani, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Next, we are giving the chance to Professor Nana to give the closing remark. To Professor Nana, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Dian, for your leading this seminar. It's very interesting. On behalf of the committee, on behalf of the Director of Postgraduate Studies, we'd like to say thank you very much to all presenters, especially Professor Hiromi Kawaguchi from Hiroshima University. It is very interesting presentation. We can learn from you about how we develop social studies in the era of pandemic. Then we also say thank you to Nicole, Mari, Serapico, Reyes. Please say hello to your husband, Wensley.
Yes, Prof. Nana.
Yes, thank you very much. We hope we can see again in the future. Okay, not in Bandung again, but in Philippines probably. And terima kasih Prof. Sapria, sangat menarik your presentation, dan kita banyak belajar juga dari pengalaman Anda. Itu saja yang bisa sampaikan ya. Once again, thank you very much. Hope we can meet again in the future. Thank you.